So I thought I'd do a quick video now that the subject of suffering is on my mind. Um, there's a lot of confusion sometimes when spiritual teachers talk about suffering because sometimes they can make it sound like it's not real because uh, the world isn't real. The only thing that's real is so-called God, or it's just the ego that creates suffering, and the ego is false. So therefore, if the ego is removed and seen through, then suffering is seen through, and so therefore suffering is not real. That's the view sometimes that is shared in some non-dual um, traditions. I think Buddhism does a good job about cultivating a perspective in which suffering is, and there's compassion that can be cultivated and understood around it. I think it's a much more embracing and holistic view, um, because there's something weird about being told that suffering isn't real, especially because most people who enter the path of self-understanding or realization or just trying to self-improve um, suffer. I mean, it's so self-evident that there is suffering, and to be told it's an illusion is almost like you want to reject whatever else comes after it. There can be some really valuable stuff that is in these traditions, but because there's this notion of like, oh, it's not real. You're like, what? Suffering's not real. Or then you get into this idea that you shouldn't be suffering, or if you're suffering, you're doing it wrong. Um, that must be your ego. Um, and it's just that this is not really healthy. Like, it's just better to embrace the fact that suffering is there. Suffering happens, and there's various degrees of it. Most of which uh, people who are watching this video with the luxury of having video cameras and video players don't know the depths of, like, being an American, being a European. For the most part, you're probably in good circumstances, even if you don't feel like you are. Um, yeah, you're not in a war torn country. There's not a huge amount of criminality and like abuse physically and sexually. Sure, it exists in patches and small parts, and that's suffering, and it's unfortunate, and it's not something you want to perpetuate or do or encourage. Because yeah, we don't necessarily want to suffer, and we can do our part to alleviate some of that. But again, suffering is there, and it's important to acknowledge that. Now, there may be things around suffering that you may be perpetuating, such as like victimization or yeah, victimization is a big thing around suffering that can kind of create more suffering. But yeah, suffering is true. It's not an illusion. And I think that the main thing I wanted to get across in this video is, yeah, don't blame yourself for suffering. Don't drop into the mindset that suffering isn't real. Um, I don't think it'll do a whole lot of good. I mean, there's exceptions because sometimes it's really good to encourage somebody to look past their suffering, to overcome their suffering, not to be um, stuck in and wallowing in for long periods of time. Although even that, you could say there are exceptions, but you could say it's a good rule of thumb. Like, yeah, like someone dies in your family, you're gonna be sad and suffer. Um, you break a leg, you're gonna hurt, and you may go through some like, oh man, that sucks. I can't work, and this is troubling, and there's gonna be some, yeah, suffering of some sort around this issue, and it's maybe going to cause you stress or having to figure out like, okay, well, what am I going to do to supplement this income, and there'll be some choices that will be needing to be made, so to say, and Maybe you'll need to get some support from people temporarily, and then maybe you'll pay them back, and maybe you'll grow some bonds, and maybe when it happens to them, you'll repay the favor, and you'll have a lifelong friend, or like it's okay to suffer. It's very natural. It's part of life. This seeking of understanding of truth isn't going to relieve um, all discomforts, all we'll call it sufferings, um, and to claim such may be a mistake, and I'll have to work on that in the way I can communicate my message sometimes, because it is easy to maybe overemphasize something else that is not suffering, and kind of portray suffering as something that is weak, or is only if you don't get the truth. Like, and that's a message you really want to not succumb to and start to victimize yourself around or blame yourself, because again, as I started the video with, it's easy to think sometimes that, like, if you're suffering, oh, it's because you did something wrong, or there's something wrong with you, or you're not meditating enough, or you're not spiritual enough, or you haven't realized enough. um, Suffering um, isn't a problem. It's not in the way of realization and understanding what you are and what truth is. All right, so with that, I'll leave you. I hope it is helpful. All right, take care. Bye.